All right, beautiful humans. Welcome back to another episode of Naked Sunday. I'm your host, Caleb Nelson, and I'm super excited to welcome on my guest today, Dr. Kevin Payne, also just going by Kevin Payne. And we'll go into that in a second, but welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate it.
What I love to do with my show here, I like to start off with just sharing my appreciation for my guest, namely because I think this world could use a little more just appreciation of each other. And I think a lot of things would start to work out a lot better if we started with that as a premise. But two things you shared in just a kind of our very brief warm up here is that you talked about just like how you endeavor to be this really open, vulnerable person. And I find that to be really, I said with you, like I'm in an interesting place in my life where I just find that really profound and really valuable. And I find a lot of strength and what's the word? Reliability, perhaps, even in seeing somebody. There's like strong leadership behind that. So that's something I always deeply admire. And then the secondary thing, kind of like a bit of an aside, just like talking about, the doctor thing. You're like, you don't care about going by the title thing. And I think that the way you just described it, and I'll let you go on it a little bit in a second, but I just love it. You're just like, this is my name. That's just a title. This is who I am. I just love that. There is no pretentious nature about that. It's just, I am who I am, and this is what it is. So thank you for just those couple things. I've known you all of 5 minutes, and that's what stuck out like that. So I just wanted to share that appreciation with you, man.
Well, Caleb, I truly appreciate that you are someone who leads with appreciation because, and we may get into this, but we have such a dearth of appreciation and there's so much strife that we introduce to our own lives because we don't appreciate what's in front of us. We don't appreciate who's in front of us. And even more perniciously, we don't appreciate ourselves.
Wow. That, ironically, the premise of Naked Sunday is about coming to terms with oneself, and the tagline is free yourself. And that is so true. I see oftentimes, and I'll let you obviously more deeply introduce yourself in a second, but I've just keep coming to see a lot of times like this, the fact that we don't appreciate ourselves starts to project itself in hate and loathing on other people, as opposed to just starting with loving ourselves. And you stop being so
It
angry at everybody
does.
else. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. I mean, think about it just 1 second. If everybody listening would just pause for a moment and think, how do you treat yourself every day? Now, would you like to be in a relationship with somebody who treated you like you treat yourself? And yet you can't get away from a relationship with yourself. So that right there is the source of a lot of our cognitive and emotional challenges that we carry through our lives.
So true. I could not agree with you more. That you can't run away from the voice in your head ultimately. And it's like, what are we doing? We're kidding ourselves. Um, Leading into it, let's get into you, man, because enough about me. I'm just me right now. I'm really curious to learn your story, and you know, you know yourself better than I do, obviously. So to that effect, Kevin, who are you?
Well, I may know myself better than you, but all of us, it turns out, don't know ourselves as well as we'd like to believe.
Ooh, that oh, that might be one of the most unique responses I've gotten to that. Wow.
I am discovering myself anew each day. Identity is humans are all about stories. We're narrative creatures. We understand the world in stories. And the most important story that each of us tells ourselves is identity. That's the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. So, me, I'm just an overeducated guy in his middle years trying to make something good out of all the bad that life has thrown my way, and I hope make the world a little better for having been in it.
I hear a lot of purpose behind that. And
Yeah.
Obviously, you led in there with
Uh,
like, there's clearly some pain in there. There's been some darkness. And that was something that, again, that stuck out. Like I see like this lead with like skydiving and then the pain that you've shared. I'd love to hear the journey. How did we get here?
sure. So I'll make this brief so that you can dig in with whatever seems to be interesting to you.
Make it as long
Uh,
as you'd like, my friend. This is we do have some
yeah,
time.
yeah. There are probably three things that people should know about me.
Hmm.
One is, we mentioned I'm overeducated. My doctorate's in sociology and psychology. I spent 15 years as a professor. I left the academy a decade ago to
Hmm.
become a tech entrepreneur, and have been on the founding team of a few tech startups over the years, and have mainly in the capacity of as a data scientist, spent a lot of time uh, consulting and advising for other early and growth stage startups.
Hmm.
So professionally, where I am is I study people and I do the really geeky stuff involved with studying people. Uh, and and substantively, one question that has always animated my personal research. So what I did, some as an academic, and then the research that's behind my latest endeavor. So Your Life Lived Well, with the company and the book and all that stuff, uh, is a lot of people have been animated. Some of the brightest minds in human history have been animated by the question, how do we live a good life? And I got fascinated with that question as a freshman in college, doing an introductory seminar in this honors program I was in. It was a weed out seminar. And so we started with like 21 of us, and a third of us were gone by the end of the first semester. And it was about classic Greek thought. And so we had to read lots of original source materials and defend ourselves.
Hmm.
So many of the ancient Greeks wrote about eudaimonia, or the good life in Greek. And I was just fascinated with that question. As I grew up and became more mature and had more life happen to me, I became interested in a different version of that question, one that I haven't seen many people address directly. And that is, how do we live a good life when something really bad has been dropped in the middle of our life and we can't get away from it? And in my case, that was multiple sclerosis.
Wow.
So, I get this diagnosis, and so on the health side, in 1989, I'm in college, and I start having some weird symptoms, and didn't think a lot about it. And then after they've been going on for a couple of months, I went in and got myself looked at, and the physician decided, oh, you're depressed, and sent me to a psychiatrist, and he said, yeah, you're clinically depressed, and gave me some medicine. Now, certainly I had some symptoms that were classic for depression. I was not feeling good, but I also was having issues with my balance and some weird eye things, and some other paresthesias, right? I was itching all over, and so they were all kind of nebulous, squishy sort of symptoms.
Hmm.
And I just got pigeonholed. So they put me on some meds, and I tried 3 or 4 different meds over the next few months, and none of them worked. And so I was not only pronounced clinically depressed, they tagged me with treatment resistant.
Wow.
So I went on with my life,
Nice.
and these episodes came and went. And when I was feeling good, I was, just living my normal life as a young invincible guy who doesn't really think about his health a lot. And then finally, one day in 2002, I woke up and I couldn't feel my left leg below my knee. was just gone.
Wow.
And I thought I had probably pinched a nerve lifting weights the day before and didn't think a lot about it. And in a few days, my leg was back. And then it was gone again. And then it was back. And then it was gone. And then other parts of my body started disappearing. And finally, one day I woke up and I could feel my right arm and my head, but the rest of my body was gone. And finally, at that point, my then wife said, "I'm putting my foot down. You're going to go get this looked at." So I did. And that instigated a medical comedy of errors in which I was first diagnosed as not having multiple sclerosis. And then it was like, oh, oops, sorry. Yeah, it's really MS and it's been there for a long time.
Wow.
So it was 17 years from my first symptoms before I finally got a conclusive diagnosis.
17 years.
Yeah, and well, and,
Holy
part of that
smokes,
is,
man.
well, but part of that is because I was an invincible young guy who just wasn't getting it looked at, and so I'm gonna own part of that myself, and the other part is that MS is really difficult to diagnose, and a lot of people go for a long time without getting a conclusive diagnosis, and it's a diagnosis of exclusion, and so it takes, it's not easy to get there.
Could you
And
describe? I'm not familiar what diagnosis of exclusion means.
yeah, a diagnosis of exclusion is where there are many possible things that could uh, cause the kinds of symptoms that someone is experiencing.
Hmm.
And so they go through and try to rule out some of the more common and least nasty of the possibilities. And by the time you winnow those away, kind of the big bad that's sitting there left over is multiple sclerosis.
Gotcha. So that sounds like a long, arduous process potentially.
Yeah, it was. It was. I finally was diagnosed in 2006. So I've known for 15 years now.
And that was said 2006 to
4 years
2002,
after the
4 years.
symptoms that directly led me to getting. Well, one of the things that you have to realize is MRIs were not as good back then. And the way I finally got diagnosed is my neurologist at the time, who was an MS specialist, because that's what they suspected that I had, but it just, so once it had been ruled out, he said, look, we've got a new MRI in the region that has a lot better resolution. And so we're going to send you there and get a new set of images on you and see what we can find out. And it turned out under that resolution, I had lots and lots of small lesions all through my system.
Wow.
I just hadn't had an exacerbation at that point that had covered a large enough area at one time to make it easy to view on some of the MRIs.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Man.
So yeah, and I went through good times and bad times, and my MS took a really, really nasty turn, and at that time, this was also during a period of time, about a decade, when my then wife was dealing with a mystery illness also, which turned out to be a very late stage 3 chromophobe renal cell carcinoma, a kidney cancer.
Oh.
And so we're going through a lot of stress during this time. And I'm trying to make a career transition from the safest job in the world as a tenure track academic to maybe the riskiest job in the world as a tech founder, right? And so maybe
so
not
throw a lot of uncertainty in there while you're at it.
Yeah, maybe not the most prudent decision on my part, but then again, as we'll find out, I like jumping out of airplanes to relax. So, maybe my judgment is a little bit off. So, in any case,
pretty high risk tolerance, my friend.
It is. And you know, here's one of the interesting things too, and this is, I talk about it a little bit in one of the chapters of my book, and but it's in human relationships, and especially in intimate relationships, there are certain characteristics that are foundations. And you know, we often talk about respect and trust.
Hmm.
And those are definitely two of the foundations for any human relationship. A third one that we don't talk about a lot is hope. You will tend to stick in a relationship if you believe, on average, that your chances for a better future are just as good or better with that person than with any of the other options you think are feasible.
Hmm.
And we don't consciously go through this calculation usually, but implicitly we're doing this under the hood. And part of that hope and the way we construct hope is that risk tolerance that you just mentioned. And this is one of those things that, so people often talk about how when they go through a really stressful time, relationships tend to blow up. And we all know this happens. Well, one of the reasons why that happens that we don't talk about is because the two people tend to have very different risk tolerances.
That makes
And
so
they
much
never
sense.
would have known that. They never would have known it if they hadn't gone through that stressful time.
Wow. I hear like stress test in my, like the back of my mind of like, almost like that's part of what you need to do to build a relationship. You have to go through a stress test and then assess those things, and then with that new information,
Yeah,
then
that's
properly
that's
better contextualize a relationship.
that's chapter 4 of the book,
Well,
actually.
there we go.
It's I call it the edge. And it's not just, we have edges all around us, and we have cognitive edges and physical edges and emotional edges and behavioral edges and social edges, and you know, all those things. And an edge is a ratio. It's a ratio of what your capacity to deliver in the moment is against what the demand to succeed is for that task. And so if you have a really high capacity and it's a really low demand, it's boring. It's a habit. It's no big deal. As the demand gets closer and closer to the capacity you can deliver, then that starts triggering our acute stress response. And because we sense a challenge, and it's not fear. We call it a fear response. Fear is how we frame the physiological and you know, mental and emotional and behavioral reactions that we have to a perceived challenge. Because excitement is the same thing, it's just framed differently.
Mm.
So as you get closer and closer, as the demand gets closer to that capacity, well, now we're in what's called a flow experience.
Mm.
And these are experiences, and we've all had them, when you're in the groove, when you are, you know, right in the zone, right? We use those, right? We are challenged, but we're succeeding, and we're behaving well, and everything just seems to kind of fit. Those are some of the best experiences we have. Well, these are highly stressful experiences, and it could be getting to know a new person that you're attracted to, or it could be jumping out of an airplane, or it could be, you know, reading deeply in a book that's challenging the way you see the world, right? Those
Yeah.
are all edge experiences. But now, as the demand creeps up over the capacity we can deliver, now we're going to fail
Mm.
because we can't deliver that much, and we feel overwhelmed and we feel frustrated. And then if the demand is a lot beyond what we can deliver, our capacity in that moment, that's trauma.
Mm.
That's what trauma is. When you are faced with a demand that you have no capacity. And generally speaking, it's so alien to what you've dealt with previously in your life, there's no reason to think you would have the capacity.
Mm.
So we become mentally, cognitively, emotionally injured, just like we can become physically injured.
Mm. And
Wow, that really digressed out of talking about me. I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. I was thought that to be quite fascinating. Um, it's clicking on a lot of things for me right now. It's like sorting out where I want to go with it, where I want to start with. Like, I love the edge threat. Like, it just that I'm curious to hear in your experience what you've seen there with like when that's too big, that trauma is just like people just shut down completely, or is that like there's like a multitude of different types of responses that people.
There's a multitude of different types of responses. We talk about the fight or flight response, right?
Mhm.
And but it's really the, and I'll go through some of these slowly here. It's the freeze, flight, fight. Actually, it's in the order that they typically happen: freeze, uh, front, flight, fight, fawn, flock, fright, faint. So, I mean, there are lots of
Wow.
things. The most important thing to understand about it is all of the human responses that we have are about either physically, mentally, or perceptually trying to get distance between you and a challenge you don't think you can win at.
Mm. So inevitably coming back to it is about somehow like increasing confidence in the one's ability to face the challenge that is, or the obstacle
Yeah,
that
it's one
is.
of two things. It's either, I mean, either it's completely, going to a different area of life where you're not
Mm.
being faced with it. Okay, so that's one option. Another option is to try to reduce the demand,
Mm.
somehow make it easier, and make it an easier task in some way. And then the third way is to build your capacity.
Mm. I just hear that, like, especially like within the coaching context of, or therapeutic context of, here's this massive goal. How do we make this bite size to find a way to meet you where you're at, and then stage the growth
Right.
process towards that? We're like, oh, I feel confident through this. Cool. Well, what's the next
Mm-hmm.
thing I can handle? That kind of thing. I had not heard that was a lot of F's, a lot of what consonation there. So I did not have heard all the other ones like faint and fawn and front, and I hadn't heard the other ones, but I've heard. I think everybody's heard fight or flight at this point. But
Right.
no, I appreciate you sharing that. That gave some interesting context for me, just within my own practice of things. Um, Diving a little bit back more into your story, then. So you were going through
Mm-hmm.
this extended period of time of, I guess we'll call it a massive inflection point in your life. Where did this start to
Mm-hmm.
where did this start to go? Especially as we're kind of leading to where it sounds like here's all the stress tests being thrown at you with
They
hope
are. Yeah.
as
And
sounds like a central piece in there as you brought it up.
it is. It is. And so my 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 I had a massive exacerbation that were primarily cognitive symptoms.
Mm.
So for a guy who makes his living with his frontal lobes, this was pretty devastating.
Mm.
And I had a new startup with a team on the line and getting a technology out in the market. And my brain imploded
Wow.
and my family imploded.
Wow.
And then, like, on top of all that, my dog died traumatically right in front of me. And then you want the real kicker out of this? So
Yeah.
2 days after he died, we had this massive storm, and I'm in the basement. I've got it walks out into the backyard, and I it when the wind comes in at a particular angle, it would start flooding the basement. So I was down there pumping it out, and with the door open, sheets of, like, rain, just like, 60, 70 mile an hour gusts. And I'm bringing a bucket of water outside, and I step outside and lightning strikes,
Oh
and
my
it hit
God.
about 40 yards away from me. And I was close enough that it was like bam, and went blind, went deaf, went, felt the shock all through me. So I was, at this point, I'm feeling like I'm living the book of Job,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And and
to
and
say the least.
I yeah, and I'd given up. I just, I came to the point in life where, and this is, a lot of people think that suicide is an emotionally overwrought decision. You get really, really upset and then you decide to kill yourself. And sometimes that's the case because it turns out, there's been over 100 years of research on the topic now, and there are multiple forms of, this act. And I never got to the point where I was actively suicidal, but there is a place where you are emotionally worn out. You are completely numb and without hope. In other words, you see where your life is at this moment, and you cannot figure out a way to chart a path to a version of life that you are interested in living. And I had reached that point. Everything that I'd cared about was gone in my life. And I had spent years slowly giving up on one dream after another. And I was pretty much done.
What changed?
My son, who was at the time about 14 or so, one day said to me, "Dad, you really suck at doing things for yourself."
Wow.
Yeah. Now, on the one hand, that's a funny teenage quip. On the other hand, it was kind of soul crushing too, to hear that.
Wow.
And in my head, I thought, well, I used to do a pretty good job of that stuff. And it was doubly difficult for me because I had all the book learning in the world about this stuff. I had all the academic preparation. I could analyze what was going on with me, but I hadn't figured out the practical day-to-day tools in my own life to live well in the face of that kind of unrelenting distress. And so I said to myself, he's right. I haven't done anything just for myself in well over a decade.
Wow.
And I had given up on so many things. I thought, I need to do something that is surprising for me. I need, something that someone in my condition shouldn't be able to do. I need to do something that would, because I had, up until this sequence of events, I had been, ask people who know me, they'll tell you I'd been a reasonably confident fellow. and I had lost all of that because I had no confidence in my body, because I had no confidence in my brain, because all the little things that that I felt I should be able to take for granted. If I want to, can I get up and walk over to that place? Will my hands work? Will I be able to solve a problem that cognitively has normally been very easy for me and very practiced for me? All of those things were hit or miss suddenly in my life, and they waxed and waned with the symptoms, and it wasn't in my control. And you probably know random schedules of reinforcement are devastating. And I was living in a body that was literally a random schedule of reinforcement. So I said, I need to not only do something that's for myself, I need to stretch myself. I need to do something that I know I'm no good at, that I have to start at the very beginning with, that I have to be humble with. And I said, so I'm going to become a legit skydiver. because I'd given up on that dream. You know, I'd started doing that in the 90s, and I got a handful of jumps in, and then education and family and career, and then health got in the way. And so I said, I'm going to figure out a way to do this, even though I can't feel my legs all the time, even though I'm always fatigued and I'm always in pain, and you know, whatever it is, because I'd done it enough so that I knew what the experience was like, and I knew that on the other side of fear, as you're exiting that door, is a kind of joy and accomplishment that few people will ever understand.
Hmm.
It's normally at our drop zone, and many drop zones will go out at 14,000 feet. And 14,000 feet, if you fall on your belly, which is the slowest that we fall when we skydive, every time I exit, I think in the back of my head, 82 seconds. Because when I exit that plane, my life expectancy is now 82 seconds.
Wow.
Unless I do something really right and save myself.
Wow.
And yeah, we got a lot of safety stuff and all that, but fundamentally, you got to deploy and you got to land.
Makes things pretty crystal clear, huh?
It does. You know, there is no distraction in skydiving. Skydiving is the most wonderfully, mindfully intense experience, because when you go out of that plane, it is just you and the sky and some of your sky family that you're jumping with, and you are completely, thoroughly in this moment. There are no distractions. Not when you're headed to the earth at terminal velocity.
So along this process, like you said, you like complete beginner's mind. I'm not good at it.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit below like expectations. So you did have very low expectations of what this could be, whatever. And I don't have to live up to what I was hearing before. These are these other places where I've been so successful in life. I expect to be able to perform that level right now because of X, Y, and Z reasons. I'm so far off from that. I don't know if I can take another crushing blow of just like having the rug ripped out from underneath me. Should I take a shot down that path? Here you are. Tell me about this journey. Like what started happening here?
Yeah. So because, you know, the thing you have to realize here is with the years as a professor and the years as a consultant and an advisor, I'd hardly been in a room for 20 years where I wasn't the expert everybody was looking to. And I felt so incapable of any version of that role at that point. So I went back and I did, you know, the ground training again and started doing my first jumps. And, you know, so your first jump, people do what's called, most people, when they learn skydiving now, they do what's called AFF. It's the Accelerated Freefall Program. And now most people do a tandem skydive or two before they go out not attached to anybody else. I had started back in the 90s when that wasn't common. So, you know, we just did the training and went up and you went out, and it was
figure it out.
Good luck to you. You're gonna need to land that thing on your own. And
sink or swim, really.
Yeah, it used to be a more wild and woolly sort of world.
Yeah.
But I came back and I did this, and so I started doing. So the first jumps, you've got two instructors hanging on to you as you exit, and then you have to do a series of moves, and then they check you off that dive, and then eventually one person is hanging on to you, and then nobody's hanging on to you, but they're with you, and you kind of go through that. And it takes 25 jumps typically to check off. It was like 100 and some skills that you have to check off on the student AREF card, you know, to get your first license in skydiving, which is called your A license. And it took me 47 jumps to get my A license.
Wow.
Because we go up, and so I didn't tell them at first that I had MS. Because I thought, well, maybe they'll say, no, we don't want to deal with this. Go, you try bowling instead.
Huh.
And I didn't want that. So I figured I had to, I'd done some jumps before, so I knew what I was in for. And I thought, well, I'll do a few jumps just so I can demonstrate to them that I'm safe and I'm going to come down all right. And then I'll tell them. So I was several jumps in, and I was having difficulty with legs. And so when you're skydiving, your legs are providing stability for you. And they're also providing drive as you're trying to move horizontally through the sky.
I don't know
So
that.
if your legs are out of balance, then you start spinning around and tumbling, and it looks crazy.
Wow.
And I've got some footage of me that looks terrifying. Do you happen to see like that Marvel movie, the Captain America?
Mhm.
No, not Captain America, Captain Marvel movie.
Yes.
Where she's like coming out of the sky, like that. I've got footage of me looking exactly like that.
Whoa.
And
So like
so,
feeling like you're completely out of control.
yeah, looking, and I'm there, struggling to like feel enough that I can straighten my legs out in the right way. And sure enough, every time I would manage to figure it out and get stable and oriented by the time it was pull time.
I mean, we're still having this conversation here today, right? So
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So for me, this was a way of putting myself at an edge, pretty obvious edge for most people, and saying, I will be able to trust myself to save myself, literally. So
wow.
I did about 140 jumps or so my first year back. And then that was 2019. And then in 2020, I said, I'm going to set myself a bigger goal. I'm going to become a serious skydiver, and I'm going to log at least one jump a day on average for the entire year.
Wow.
And I managed to log 370 jumps in 2020. And by almost anyone's standards, that's a lot of skydiving. That's a lot. And that's tripping your acute stress response every time and recovering from it. Because this was about me. I had become afraid of my own body. And I was going to develop confidence again in myself. And so, yeah, I picked a kind of an extreme exposure therapy approach, but it worked for me.
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
What'd you find I mean, you're here now. What have you learned? What have you learned on that path?
Gosh, there's a whole book and
I'm gonna have to get the book, by
uh,
the way. I got somebody in mind,
yeah.
actually. I'm also going to get it as a gift.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that is great. We appreciate that. No, in all seriousness, the most important thing is that almost all of us are at a place in our life where we wish some things could be better in our lives. And I was certainly going through an extreme version of that, but I'm not that unusual. Half of all Americans live with a chronic health condition. 18% of us have 5 or more chronic diagnoses. It's everywhere. And it's really difficult to explain to other people around you, even if they live with you. They don't see most of what's going on with your illness because they're medical symptoms, not external signs. And they don't see the pain. They don't see fatigue. They don't see the distress. They don't see the overwhelm. They don't see the frustration. They don't see the despair. They don't see any of those things that come along. And yet they're really, really common. And medical science gives us no solution. They don't have a cure, otherwise it wouldn't be chronic. So what we do know from all the research is that 2/3 of health outcomes are dependent on cognitive, behavioral, and environmental conditions. And those are things that we can work on. And those are things that we can carefully influence if we're patient over time. Now, there are 150 ways to change a behavior. All of those will work for someone, only some of them will work for you. And the ones that work for you now likely won't work for you in 6 months or a year or a decade or something, because you change, your environment changes, your goals change, etc. So my fundamental approach to all this is not, there is a path, there is one way, here's your checklist of things that you need to do. My approach is about, I want to train you to be able to recognize and construct your own path reliably, because it's going to be different. I mean, if somebody wants to, jump out of planes with me, cool, I'm there for you, well, hit me up, we'll go, no problem. But most people don't. And yet other people have edges that they are concerned about, that they want to get back to, that they want to visit, that they want to grow into, right? So what are your edges? And where do you find happiness and meaning and satisfaction and security? And there are only 6 or 7 things that actually contribute to our quality of life, and they're all experiences. It's all experiences that make you feel happy, experiences that make you feel meaningful, experiences that make you feel accomplished and competent in the world, etc. And life with a chronic illness kind of strips your life of those experiences. It doesn't have to, though. We just have to become more creative about it.
Again, unpacking a lot of things in there, a lot of parallels, and not only how I work with people, but just like what I've seen in my own personal experiences. One of the biggest ones that sticks out is, for me, I just hear finding a contextually appropriate solution. It's a way, not the only way. I've heard other people say the statement of what got you here is not what's going to get you to the next level. And that really brought up of like, of all these things, it might work for 6 months, it might work for 9 months, but it might not work beyond that because of the new variables. I always talk about a lot of behavioral change. I owned a gym for about 10 years. And I think about somebody wants to lose weight. It's like, it's not about you losing the weight. It's about you keeping the weight off. You got to go through like the next season, that kind of idea.
Yeah, there's a nice little aside. I once, during one exacerbation, it got really bad, and physically I lost most of my habits and stuff. And in this period of 2 years, I gained 120 pounds. I went from a 27-inch waist to barely squeezing into a 46-inch pant.
Wow.
And then I mean, you're looking at me now, and I'm not near that weight. And so over the next 2 years, I mean, one day morning, I woke up, I went to the mirror, and I saw myself for the first time in a long time. And I was like, oh my gosh, I look like the guy who ate Kevin. And so I went through all that behavioral change again and changed my everything and lost the 120 pounds in the next 2 years. And I've kept it off for almost 20 now.
Wow. Well, first and foremost, congratulations on that. And also just congratulations on that, on the journey. It just sounds like you find a lot of, dare I say, purpose and fulfillment on this. And I got to imagine there's other things that are changing along the way which I think of behavior change with I'll say clients. I work primarily with like high performance couples, but we'll say like, hey, well, I want to fix my business, or I want to increase my bottom line. I want to make more money. Great. But what else do you need to address along the way? And people don't think, like, they think they want more money, but it's the other stuff you learn along the way.
Yeah.
Like, what were some of the unexpected things that you took away from
Well,
that?
well, A, to those people, one, that's a goal, not a plan.
Yeah.
And B, and this is chapter 13 in the book. I distinguish between certain. Notice how I just subtly threw that in there.
Hey, I'm going to recommend this thing. I give out as gifts. I give out books for people in my that when they sign up with me, like, because I think it's the most valuable. But this is going on the list.
Oh, thanks. Cool. So I separate out between superficial goals and deep goals, and there are things, we have certain superficial indicators that we associate with particular goals. Oh, that's a strong person, and maybe he's big and buff and all that. Well, okay, that's a surface indicator, and when we get to people talk about money as a goal, and money is money is temporary storage for valuable experiences. I mean, that's all it is. And stuff isn't going to get you there. Money itself isn't going to get you there. Nobody on their deathbed ever said, "Oh, I wish I had more money." It just doesn't happen. And we've got there's maybe 3 or 4 good longitudinal studies of people over the decades. So literally they started when they were like teenagers and followed them all the way into their 70s, 80s, and universally it's the experiences, it's the engagement with life, it's the engagement with other people, it's the engagement with their community, it's the engagement with nature. Those are the things that people find valuable and that they look back on and see as valuable. And yet our tiny little primal brain doesn't have the perspective to see that. So when we're fearful, when we are stressed, when that part of our brain is driving, we literally can't see the big picture. We just can't. It's impossible. So you have to learn to disengage that first.
In your process, what was it? Was it the actual skydiving, or what was it that was disengaging that? Because it sounds, I mean, obviously, lightning, bang, here you go, and your son goes, you don't do for you. And again, you have the educational background to be like, yeah, practically understand the science behind it. Practically, what did you do to start, well, I guess, down regulating that panic or that stress so that you could come back to a place where, again, becoming the beginner in the room, like that kind of thing, and the finding that humility? What was some things that you did specifically, again, carrying more like contextual stuff?
Yeah, one of the most important strategies that I developed, and this really is one of the few things that pretty much universally works if people will do it. And so everybody has their plan A. This is life is going to go well, and I'm going to succeed, and this is what it is. And some people with forethought will have plan B. And they'll say, okay, this is my backup. This is what I'm going to do when things don't go quite what I want. When you live with a chronic health condition like MS, some days are so dysfunctional that it's tough to get anything done. So I came up with plan C. And plan C is the tiniest, minimal, smallest thing that I can do to express my agency, my influence, my control in the world that day, so that when I come out of even the worst day, I've got something and not nothing. And no matter how small it is, the cognitive and emotional difference of coming out of the day with something is light years different than nothing.
In my vernacular, I use a lot of minimum effective dosage. And especially I just hear like, what's the minimum effective dosage
Sure.
for success, or the feeling of success? I've seen certain apps like what's it called? No 0 days and little things like that. But again, like the word contextual keeps coming up because your situation compared to most, it's quite extreme, and defining those parameters to what you understand. And I mean, I don't, like you said before, I don't know what that feels like. I mean, my aunt has MS, but like, I still don't know. I have no idea. And her experiences of that could be drastically different than yours.
Right.
Like like just because the diagnosis is the same does not mean it's the exact same thing. You are two different humans living in drastically different sociological, psychological spaces with different experiences prior to that. I just hear that just being like, you have to like define it for yourself. And I want to just bring it back a little bit to what you had brought up earlier about the path. I hear so many people when I started hearing, like, I hear words of, I'm quite sensitive to dogma, how much you've looked into some of my stuff, but I won't bring it up too much right now. But like should, shouldn't, right, wrong, good, bad, like rigid, hard set beliefs of like, this has to be this way or I'm a failure. And I hear that so much in we'll call it the crash. Again, I move a little bit outside the health space again now, but like the crash diet approach. It's like, it's got to be this way and it's all or nothing or I'm a failure. And then just, you never see that sustain itself for a long period of time. And I love that you had 3 strategies, A, B, C. Here is like almost like ultimate. B was like, okay, next step down, but C, like in case of emergency, break the glass. Like this is the final thing, like grab that, like, because that way you can still find, I love the word agency. I really love that word. I think it's such a powerful term. That's how I heard it. I'm just sharing this for anybody like who might need a different way of processing it, because that just like that rang so true for me to hear how people, I guess people feel. I'd be curious to hear your perspective on this as I look broad strokes across the people I've worked with. So probably there's a lot of bias as well, but I hear so many people nowadays just so afraid to make the decision just for themselves and to think about what really is going to work for them. Yes, they see somebody else's thing that's working for them, but it's like, it still needs to, like, let's take some of the core pieces. Maybe it's the start. This is a framework we're going to start with, but we have to make it personal. You cannot just jam a square peg in a round hole.
Right.
What has been your experiences there?
Ultimately people get on this self-defeating treadmill with these things. They try, the next big thing that comes down the pike, and it's bright and shiny for a little bit and they feel all motivated, but motivation only lasts about this long. I'm all for motivation. I'm all for inspiration. I'm much more concerned with what do we do when the inspiration fades? And because that's where we're going to live most of our life. And that means we've got to become more examined. We have got to become more purposeful, more mindful. We've got to become more aware. We just have to. I mean, that's long and the short of it is you can't drive down the highway and not pay attention and expect to arrive there safely. And the same thing is, with our body. And so and our brains and our relationships and all these things. I call it, we need to maintain some kind of understanding of motion. I mean, stasis is death. If it's a living creature, You've got to actually keep working to stay where you're at, because otherwise you will deteriorate, and your system will live up or down to the challenges that are put in front of it. And we can't just suddenly make a big, huge leap. If we want to be way up here, well, then we got to take little baby steps and then back off and allow ourselves the time to relax and recover and grow and consolidate and rest and sleep and all those things, because that's where the growth is happening. It's in response to the challenge, not during the challenge. So what I'm interested in, especially because I'll have, like many people with MS, really bad days where it's hard to function at all. So I judge my client, it's not about doing a little better every day. I call it the mean positive delta, which is my geeky math way of saying a little better on average every day. And that's really important because it's a small change and it's on average, which means, yeah, some days I'm going to overshoot my goal, some days I'm not going to make it, but over time, I'm making real steps in a direction that's going to be valuable for my life. And I started thinking about this with when I was all the way back when I had that exacerbation and gaining all that weight, and I was not physically able to do much of a workout when I was at, that lowest point. So that's where I came up with the idea of Plan C, and that's where I came up with the idea of, okay, no matter how badly I'm feeling this day, I'm going to get, I'll get 2 minutes of walking around slowly, if that's it. I will lift the lightest weights, for like 8 core muscle groups. And I'm just going through the motion. I'm just, at this point, really all I'm doing is practicing good form. And that's okay. Because what people don't understand about changing a behavior is that changing a behavior is not changing a behavior. It's always replacing existing behaviors. It's always relearning, but a behavior is like an iceberg. The thing that we see is at the top, but it's also doing so much more. It's filling in a place in our life. It's contributing to routines. It's contributing to our sense of identity. It's, just layer after layer after layer of things that are going on. So if you want to change a behavior, you've got to address, well, where does that sit in your identity? And where does that, what kind of rituals is this fulfilling in your life so that you can put something else in that's giving you some of those ritual values that you're going to want to do instead. And so when we fail, when we try that shiny new thing and we stay on that diet for like 2 weeks and then we crash and burn, or we change our behavior for a few days or weeks and then we crash and burn. We have set our standards so far beyond where our current capacity is. And we got to realize that our capacity, we may be able to get there. It's going to take little baby steps over a long period of time. And we're going to backslide. And we've got to keep going. And part of building a habit is building a place in your life for it to live. And so sometimes we may not be, maybe there's a day where I can't even work out because literally, the spasticity is going and I can't, but you know what? I can limp down to the weight room and I can mentally go through the routine because I've still held a place for it in my life.
You're leaving me with so much to just chew on for the rest of my day. Just so you know, I'm going to be lost in thought for the next 5 hours, probably. So, which is
Well,
my
good.
wife laughs at me all the time. I love it. Speaking of making space, I actually used to feel very guilty making a lot of time for me to just stop and think. And then I realized, oh, I do much better work and I'm of much greater service to others when I do that. So, speaking to all these things, like the acceptance of those things is, I think that's a very powerful place in the we'll call it the process. A lot of more consonation there, but that was I really appreciate you just sharing that insight there, because people make it, again, that all or nothing. And I really love how you just described this entire really powerful spectrum of ways to still check the box on, I did right by me today. I can achieve success as long as I allow myself to define it in a few different ways and scaling and meeting myself where I'm at in my life.
Yeah.
That's just, and it's, I hear it like a lot of like self-respect in that, and not
Well,
judging yourself.
yeah.
You know?
Fundamentally, it's well, I'll say something about that in a second. But fundamentally, it's about, you still have to have a relationship with yourself, and do something to construct a better relationship with yourself. And gosh, the thought train just left. What was it you just said that I said?
Self-respect.
Yeah, self-respect. And one of the things that we know more about, the reason why we know more about ourselves than we know about other people, is we know all the little lies that we're telling. And humans lie all the time. And we lie to ourselves all the time. And the most successful lies are the ones that we believe about ourselves. Those are the most successful lies, because then you've got somebody who can convince others once they've convinced themselves. So it's easy to lose respect for yourself when you are inside with yourself, trying to shuck and jive yourself into some stupidity. You know what you're doing. Part of you is just there saying, okay, am I going to let myself get away with this or not? And one of the steps that we can get to is just being honest with ourselves, saying, I really don't want to do this thing. And I know I feel like I should want to do this thing, but I really don't. And I could stand here and make up some kind of BS rationalization for myself, but I'm not going to do it. Now you may be a jerk, but you're an honest jerk, and you can respect that.
Good starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't solve the whole problem, but it's the start of the solution. And is there ever
steps.
well, yeah, plus is there ever even really a resolution?
No,
it's a
there's
process.
not. I mean, expecting a resolution, the resolution is death.
Yeah.
That's the resolution. And expecting a resolution, expecting a solution for your problem, that's wrong. We're humans. Problems with solutions are a small slice of what we deal with. As humans, we have challenges that need strategies. And those strategies are going to change, right? And we have to just really back off and show ourselves more grace.
I couldn't have said that better myself, my friend. Obviously, speaking of respect, I want to be respectful of your time. I have only really one more question for you today. And this is inspired. I realize where it's inspired from. About once or twice a year, I read Man's Search for Meaning. I think it's a really profound book. I really do. To that effect, my question to you, my friend, is what is your purpose?
My purpose? Wow. It's pretty clear cut. I appreciated what you said about dogma earlier. And I I write this in the introduction to the book, and I was trained as an academic. I always did academic work. There's a point in the introduction where I reflect on the idea, imagine my surprise when I came to a point in my life where I was compelled to write something that could be taken as self-help. Because fundamentally, most self-help is fluffy, smarmy bullshit. And I didn't want to contribute to that problem. But on the other hand, self-help is all we have when the system fails us. And I understand that too. So I wanted to write something that was, grounded in the science and really, backed by experience. And it's not just me. I mean, in the process, in the last decade, I've interviewed hundreds, I surveyed thousands, I built a scraper that went out and collected 2.23 million data points. I did meta-analyses across thousands of studies. So, I mean, a lot of science here, but fundamentally, it's about there's no secret, there's no one true path, there's none of that. There is, however, you learning to live an examined life in a more effective way, in a kinder way, and in a way that will help you get closer to the goals that you will truly value. And that takes time and that takes patience. But we can all make steps on that journey.
Next 5 hours, like I said, I'm gonna be lost in my own translation there. I really just love everything you've shared today, and you know, I'm coming to a place in my life that I really believe everything happens for a reason, and I feel truly. Right now, we're sitting in the holiday season. Right now, as this is being recorded, it's not going to be released until I'm looking at January. But in a time of year, which is a lot of the rebirth. But right now, I just want to share like how grateful I am for just what. There's a lot of stuff that's just echoed in ways that I've needed to hear in my own life right now. So for that, on a one-to-one basis, I really thank you for what you've shared today and just your story and the lessons you've shared. And I will be getting a couple books, and I got some people in mind for that. To that effect, if somebody's listening today and they're like, how can I connect with you, Kevin? How would they be able to best reach you?
Yeah, they go to yourlifelivedwell.co, and or we can also, I've got justjump.life, if that's easier to remember, that people can, it's mapped onto it. But the links for all the social media, on social, we're your LL Well, pretty much every place. But you can get that there. You can listen to my own podcast there. You can get 100 pages free of the book there. You can see when seminars and webinars and other things are coming out. So, we've got 24 different seminars, focused topical seminars for people who live with chronic conditions or their loved ones and caregivers, and then another 8 that are for medical, therapeutic, health, wellness, and fitness professionals. So
beautiful. Well, I'll be sharing that all in the show notes. So anybody who's listening, that's a simple place to go check it out. Go find that right there. Any other thoughts you wish to share with the audience before we head out?
No, I just, I want to say thank you for a thoughtful and empathic conversation. This has been really lovely. And the only thing that I want to emphasize is in this season where, when people will start hearing this at the beginning of the year, when people are all gung-ho about stuff, just realize that the half-life of a New Year's resolution is about 18 days or so. And half of us have failed by a little over 2 weeks. In the new year, practice being kinder to yourself, not with a particular goal in mind, Don't be nice. Nice is nice. It's, but it's superficial. Be kind, and see how that just works in the waves of change that come forth in your life. And start with being kinder to yourself.
Like I said, I couldn't say that better myself. And it's been my pleasure to just have you on today. And like I said, I think a lot of things happen in this world for a reason. And I just appreciate your company. And I hope that this relationship can continue to grow. This has been truly inspiring. And I really appreciate your time today. And like I said to everybody, as we're about to sign off, check those show notes, get the book. I know I'm getting it and I'm going to read that. And as we leave, as my only reminder, everybody, is love everybody.
Be well, everyone.